The world can change. The world can change for you and me here and now in our generation. But it's not going to change because we want it to. The world's going to change when we start to make sacrifices, when we start to make hard choices, when we're willing to get uncomfortable. If you think nothing can fundamentally change within one generation, just look at the change for gay rights. Now, I'm going to assume nobody in my audience is homophobic, not consciously or intentionally so. If you had a baby that you had to give away for adoption, you had just two choices. You could go to one adoption agency where you're 100% certain it'll be given to a gay or lesbian couple. Or you can go to another adoption agency where it'll be raised by a pair of heterosexual parents. Which agency are you going to choose? I know many people who are not homophobic who would not hesitate to say that they would prefer that their own child, if they had to give their child up for adoption, be raised by a pair of heterosexual parents rather than a gay couple or a lesbian couple. I'm not one of them. Here in white English-speaking Canada, or in Texas, or in Georgia, or in New York City, one of the strongest reasons to choose the gay adoption agency is that it's extremely unlikely that my child would be raised by fundamentalist Christians or by anyone who is a member of any religion really taking it too terribly seriously. I would like to think that any Muslim, Christian, or Jew who is in a committed, open gay marriage who goes to adopt is going to be someone who is, if they're not atheist or highly secular in their outlook in the world, they will at least have a very detached, modern view of whatever religion it is that they're a member of. I would like to think. So you're playing the statistics here, right? Playing the odds. If you think the world can't change, just think about how amazing it is that in 2021, this is even an option we're talking about. When I was a child, the debate was whether or not allowing gay couples to adopt children at all should be legal or illegal. And that was a fiercely fought debate on both sides. But inevitably and inexorably, what people had to admit to themselves was that some heterosexual people are terrible parents and some gay people are terrible parents. And the difference between being a good parent and a bad parent is not the difference between being straight and being gay. This isn't a criterion that you can use to disqualify people from raising children. What about religion, though? Do you think there are some religious views that should disqualify you from being able to adopt a child? Do you think there aren't any? Do you think there aren't any beliefs at all that should disqualify someone from adopting and raising a child? What if it's your child? What if you quite literally have skin in the game? What if it's your child being given up for adoption? Are you okay with a neo-Nazi raising your child? Are you okay with a supporter of ISIS or the Taliban? There are no ideological limits. There are no beliefs that we would use to distinguish whether people should or should not have certain political rights that would disqualify them from participating, for example, in adoption as equals. My father had a whole bunch of kids with a whole bunch of different women, and he made it sound really cool. I should totally try that sometime. One of these women, he got pregnant, and I don't even know what he promised her, but she kept the baby, and then she figured out my father was a terrible person. She decided to give this kid up for adoption. I am considered ethnically Jewish because my mother is Jewish. My father was not Jewish in any way. And this woman whom he got pregnant, had a kid with, she also was not Jewish in any way. And she made the decision to give this kid to a Jewish-only adoption agency. An agency that guaranteed the baby would be given to and raised by Jewish parents. Why would you do that? Why would anyone do that? It's because she didn't want the baby to be raised by crazy Christians, Christian fundamentalists. And she knew, living where she did in white English-speaking Canada, there were a lot of Christians who had big families, like Christians who already had 4 kids, who went out and adopted a 5th because that's how they felt about showing love and Lord. And I would suppose she had a bit of a stereotype notion of Jews as being more intellectually or culturally refined. This is a stereotype that YouTube is helping to break down. We get to see the reality of who everybody is here on YouTube. And in the old days, there were really just a few people on TV, Einstein, Sigmund Freud, kind of a cherry-picking selection of who got famous and who was celebrated. So I have a half-brother who is 0% Jewish ethnically, whereas I'm 50% Jewish. And people perceive me as 100% Jewish. Nobody calls me Irish. I don't know why. But he was raised by a Jewish architect who adopted him in Toronto. So they're hypothetical questions I'm asking, but they're only half a step removed from reality. I suppose that you, dear viewer, are not homophobic and you're not Islamophobic. If it were your baby, if you had a newborn baby right now and you had to choose between giving that baby to a Christian-only adoption agency, a Jewish-only adoption agency, or a Muslim-only adoption agency, which one would you choose? If you think we're all equal, if you think it doesn't matter, if you think that someone who believes in and practices the Islamic faith is going to be just as good a parent to your child as an atheist, as a secular family, or even compared to a fundamentalist Christian, if you think they're going to give your child just as bright a future. Oh, right. And you know what? Let's say it was a daughter. Let's just say it wasn't your son. It was your daughter you were giving up for adoption. Which set of dice do you want to roll? Giving up to a Muslim agency, a Jewish agency, or a Christian agency? It's a terrible choice, isn't it? And you know what the truth is? I think if I were sitting and having this conversation with someone who was actually a member of the Christian faith, of the Jewish faith, or of the Muslim faith, they would have to stop and reflect on what a terrible choice it is themselves. Because even the most deluded, true-believing Christians, they're aware of who their fellow Christians are. Even the most atheist, secular members of the Jewish faith, they have some sense of what's going on in Israel and what's going on, at the shul down the block, what's going on politically in terms of what these people actually believe and practice. Ooh, gee, if I give my kid up for adoption, you have some direct sense of who your co-religionists are. Okay? Things can change. We can have a fundamentally secular atheist society, but not just if you want it. Only if you're willing to get uncomfortable. Only if you're willing to make terrible sacrifices. And the change is going to involve coercion. I had a teacher, and it's a little bit significant for this story, that this was a male teacher married to a female teacher, and they both taught in the same school. At that age, I was not the self-confident, well-spoken person that I am today. I would have been 11 when this happened. And I was still figuring out what the political status of homosexuals in our society was. And such a different political context in those days. Insults against homosexual people for being homosexual were heard on the schoolyard every day, constantly. It was frankly the definition of being weak or stupid or clumsy to be called gay, right? It was heard constantly. But I was aware there was this struggle for gay rights and gay equality going on. And on the other hand, there was also a huge discourse at that time that's now forgotten about trying to medicalize homosexuality. And I knew many children who believed in this out of ignorance. People who tried to present homosexuality as if it had crept into our society because the drinking water was poisoned, or there was too much air pollution, that this was some kind of recent thing in our society, and that could be cured, right? So there were a lot of powerful messages and sources of misinformation around me. And I was taken into class with this male teacher just once, and it was because he was popular with the other teachers, and there was a female teacher he was married to, and we got a special sex ed class with that male teacher. He wasn't my teacher. I saw him rarely in the school, and I guess it was just because he liked to give that class, and other teachers didn't want to do the job. And the other teachers, I can't say all the teachers in the school, but some of 4 or 5 teachers in the room who all thought this was kind of upbeat and fun and funny. And this guy gave the most horrifyingly homophobic lecture to us imaginable, constantly conflating homosexuality with pedophilia, like claiming that he claimed openly that you shouldn't allow homosexuals to be school teachers because if you do, they will molest the kids. Like, it's very easy to say that today any school teacher who gave that lecture, especially if it were recorded on someone's cell phone, would be fired or would be asked to resign. Okay? And I can't say the students were cool with it. I mean, we were children. I think the students didn't know how to respond. The other teachers were cool with it. They were kind of like laughing and encouraging him to go along. They'd all heard it before. They'd heard him give this lecture once or twice a year, every year, for who knows how many years. This was his perspective on human sexuality. And I mean, he covered all this stuff from such a crass, vulgar perspective. He talked about getting laid in college, and it stays with me. I'm cursed with a really accurate memory. I could repeat, more or less verbatim stuff that's got it. It was a really disturbing experience for me. But it was disturbing because of the fundamental political and ethical question, right, of the status of homosexuals and gay rights in our society. And I mean, it was disturbing because it was an authority figure in a school teaching this as curriculum. It wasn't just someone's crazy gay uncle, at a garden party. Right? Now, firing that teacher, using coercion, being the thought police, requiring that your teachers believe in and support and propound the government's own doctrine on gay rights. It's made a lot of people uncomfortable. I mean, who knows? There are no statistics for this. How many God-fearing traditional Christians, male and female, became school teachers in Canada and the United States? How many of them grew up as good Bible-bashing, daycare center volunteering, I love kids kind of people who love kids and love Jesus and think they're making the world a better place, and went into that job 100% expecting to do the Lord's work, and then found out that in the eyes of the Department of Education, in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of the general public, they were a thought criminal for teaching things that to them, they learned from their own parents and grandparents, things they would say around their own dinner table. That wasn't just not permissible in their professional, métier as a school teacher, but that was punishable. You could be fired, and indeed you could become canceled. You could become a pariah socially as a result. I knew a family of Nazis. I didn't know them real well. Did I mention that I'm Jewish? The father had been a school teacher until one day, and I heard this story from many people because there were many witnesses, until one day he gave a lecture to the class that today we would describe as alt-right or race realism. What this teacher told the students in the class was that it was okay for them to be friends with members of other races, for the black kids to be friends with white kids, as long as they knew, as long as they were prepared for the eventuality that there was a race war coming, and in the near future, our parents were going to be killing each other, or we were going to be at war with each other. We were going to be killing each other in the streets. Right? I realize this is hard to believe. And even as a child, when I heard this story from multiple sources, I found it hard to believe. I saw that guy. I never really spoke to him. I knew his kids. I walked past his house frequently. He had a team of those stereotypically Nazi attack dogs. I think Doberman Pinschers, right? Everything about this guy, everything about his attack dogs, everything about his wife, everything about his kids absolutely clicked with this story. I don't want to name his kids. Obviously, on some level, I don't know if the story is true. He gave his sons names that only a neo-Nazi would give their kids. Like, either you are a neo-Nazi if you give your kids these particular names, or you're one of those people who's into the revival of the pre-Christian Germanic gods. Almost all those people are neo-Nazis. Like you'd have to be... everything checked out with this story, and I heard it back from multiple witnesses. This guy had been a school teacher, and what I was told was that after he was either fired or asked to resign, and resigned because he was told he would be fired. I was told that after he stopped being a school teacher, he had to drive a taxi cab for a living. I don't know if he did that forever or if that's what he did immediately thereafter. Okay? I remember the guy. I remember the story. I remember meeting his sons. They were students in my school. And I remember so many times walking past that fence with that team of attack dogs. Do you think anyone can be a school teacher, regardless of what they believe? Right? Do you think neo-Nazis can be school teachers? Do you think they have freedom of conscience, freedom of belief? Right? Do you think there is nothing in the Muslim faith that is as incompatible with modern secular Western democracy as the tenets of neo-Nazism? The transition we're talking about here to a truly secular democracy, to an atheist society, okay, it's going to mean real sacrifices. It's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Now, what the French have done is set down a very strange series of precedents for us. The first big controversy had to do with banning the headscarf, really banning women concealing their faces for religious reasons, right? And many, many years after this happened in France, the same drama played out in Quebec, the former French colony, now a province of Canada. In Quebec, they phrased the law a little bit differently, so that it was banning all overt or ostentatious symbols of the religious faith you're a member of, but that included headscarves for Muslim women and face coverings or what have you. And so it was established in Quebec that if you were a public sector employee of any kind, a school teacher or a nurse, wearing this kind of costume would be banned. How long is it going to take for us to admit to ourselves that what we're banning is not the hat, it's what goes on inside people's heads, right? What we're banning is not the costume, it's the belief betokened by the costume, right? Like, is it really the Nazi flag we're offended by? Is it really someone having Nazi tattoos that's a problem? No. It's the belief, it's the commitment, it's the ideology, right? On a fairly deep level, it's morally and ethically who they are. Now, I do not think that Islam should be singled out for persecution in France, And I don't think it should be singled out in China. And I don't think it should be singled out in Canada or the United States. The more we admit what the problems with Islam are, the more we have to confront those problems within Christianity, within Judaism, even within other religions that are marginal to our part of the world, like Buddhism, which I happen to have some expertise in, right? Like, in as much as these same problems appear also within Buddhism or Hinduism, right? We're also going to have to use coercion to eliminate them. France passed a law. Sorry, I don't think it's passed. I think they've just proposed the law as of today, as of this date on the calendar. They have proposed and they are debating a law that is innocuously said to be opposed to Muslim separatism, right? And from my perspective, that is precisely what makes it an unfair and immoral law, right? Because the problem isn't separatism. The problem is Islam. And in as much as the problem is in Islam, we have to recognize the same problems when they occur within Christianity. We have separate communities of Christians, don't we? Right? Do you see what it's getting at, this idea of separatism? We have communities of Christians that live as communes, cut off from the outside world, right? And they don't send their kids to normal secular schools. They don't wear normal secular clothes, right? You know what I'm talking about? Whether you think of the Amish or the Mennonites or what have you, we have a whole bunch of them in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the middle prairies, the parts of Canada where land is cheap enough. And they raise their kids in ignorance to work on the farm and so on. They're a separate society within Canada. Is that the problem? Why is that only a problem when it's Islam? Right? Why is that not a problem for Christians? We had a case here in Canada against Orthodox Jews. I forget if it went to the Supreme Court or just a medium level court, frankly, but it went up several levels of the court. We had a case about whether or not it was legal for Orthodox Jews to operate a separate bus company. A bus company that only sold tickets to and was only for Orthodox Jews. And you know what the crazy part is? It wasn't a human rights case. This wasn't about like equality, like, hey, if I'm not Jewish, I should be able to buy a ticket to get on that bus too. It wasn't about, no. It wasn't like black people complaining they were discriminated against. No. The case was brought by another bus company saying it was unfair competition. Hey, they're making less money because of this. All right. There is no doubt that the threat posed by Islamic terrorism, the threat posed by the cultural contrast between Islam and, the Western mainstream, there's no doubt that that's drawn our attention to what the fundamental, issues are in the 21st century. Okay. But, let's treat as shallow what is shallow, and let's treat as profound what is truly profound. Okay. You can ask someone to change their headdress. You can ask someone to change their scarf. You can ask Christians, literally in Quebec in this case now, not to wear their Christian crosses on the outside of their clothes, but to put them under their shirt. Okay? You can ask members of other religions to take off their turban. I don't even know if a turban counts as a religious symbol. What if you're just rocking a turban because you think it's fashionable? All these things. All right. Ultimately, it's never going to be about addressing the costume. It's going to be about addressing competence. Okay. Competence to do what? Competence to take on fully the duties of being a citizen in a democracy. Okay? Who is competent to be a school teacher? Who is competent to be a police officer? All right? Who is competent to debate the laws and make the laws? Who is competent, to shape the minds and expectations of the next generation? I don't think it's a shallow or trivial thing that teachers were fired for homophobia, that this new standard emerged in our society of what was acceptable and what was not, and that educational institutions took on the burden of saying, hey, we have a homophobic society. We have a homophobic culture. We live in a country where on the schoolyard every day, little kids call other little kids gay and worse names, insults specifically linked to homosexuality. They're hearing that all the time. And it's not enough for us to just silently, passively preserve our own moral superiority. We have to get out there and actively counter that. We have to actively overturn centuries of normalization of homophobia and train children to live in a new world, a world that doesn't even exist yet, where homosexuals and heterosexuals really are equal, right? We have to, with at least that much coercion, quite possibly much, much more, overturn centuries and millennia of religious thinking, of tradition, and prepare our children not to live in the world as it is, but in the world as it should be.